Welcome to the Man-Made Monstercast. I am Rob138, and holy hell has it been a minute or what? Yeah, so it appears I made a bunch of announcements regarding new content and then I disappeared for a while, huh? My bad. On the topic of said announcements, I would like to remind everyone that the Man-Made Monstercast is a Patreon-supported podcast. By becoming a patron, you unlock bonus posts and exclusive episodes of Pod 138. So, life got a little crazy and a little bit hectic for a bit. Once again, I apologize for the elongated absence, but now we're back in the lab just in time for everyone's favorite spooky season. That's right, Halloween is just around the corner, and I don't know about you guys, but whenever Halloween approaches, I get in the mood for some of the classics. So today's film will be the Hammer House of Horror classic, The Curse of Frankenstein. The film opened in the UK on May 2nd in 1957 and was followed by a US release on June 25th in 1957. The Curse of Frankenstein was a very loose adaptation of Mary Shelley's classic Gothic horror novel. This was the first Frankenstein film in the Hammer Frankenstein series, and it would also be the first film that Hammer would produce in color. Ironically, the film would also serve as the first Frankenstein film to be produced in color as well. Universal had considered shooting The Son of Frankenstein in color, but they didn't like how Boris Karloff's makeup looked in color. While on the subject of Karloff, he was actually planned to be in the role of the creature before the Universal legal team came swooping in, but more on that in a second. The film was directed by Terence Fisher and starred Peter Cushing as Baron Victor Frankenstein and Sir Christopher Lee as the creature. Though Cushing and Lee had both appeared in 1948's Hamlet, 1952's Moulin Rouge, and 1956's Alexander the Great, this would be the first time they'd ever met. Rumor had it they struck up a quick friendship when Lee entered Cushing's dressing room and lamented, "I've got no lines," to which Cushing responded, "You're lucky, I've read the script." It's to be noted that Cushing also rewrote a lot of his dialogue. They would become lifelong friends, and it is often joked that Lee built a career on trying to kill one of his closest friends due to their roles in this film and their roles as Dracula and Van Helsing, respectively. So, the elephant in the room. I'm sure you guys have heard me say creature instead of monster a few times now. Yes, the creature. Hammer were very careful not to do anything that might resemble the 1931 Frankenstein film, as Universal were already aware of Hammer's remake and they were just itching for a lawsuit. This included the term the monster, as Universal had this trademarked with respect to their Frankenstein property. In response, Terence Fisher and Hammer Studios veered away from the tried and true Frankenstein tropes and decided to go more character-driven, with the focus being on Victor rather than his creation. And let's be honest here. This was an incredibly ballsy move. Whenever you so much as mention Frankenstein, the first thing that pops into your head is Boris Karloff and the iconic Jack Pierce makeup. It's actually also worth mentioning that Fisher outright refused to watch the classic Universal film. But, getting back to the character work of Frankenstein. The 1931 Universal film implies, in an almost tongue-in-cheek fashion, that it is Colin Clive's Henry Frankenstein that is the actual villain of the film. But the Hammer film does not have time for implications or sheepishness. Peter Cushing's Victor Frankenstein is a cold and callous genius, and at times a complete bastard that cares about nothing except his work, and nothing will stop him from achieving his goals. While Lee's creature seems at times a hapless child left to wander aimlessly through this new life, and at other times an absolute monster. Universal, please don't sue me for that. The film opens with Frankenstein speaking with a priest in a prison awaiting his execution. Fun fact here, the priest's line, "Perhaps we had better start from the beginning," is actually the opening line to the seminal White Zombie album, Astro Creep 2000. From here we get a flashback of young Frankenstein. No, not the Mel Brooks film. It's actually a different Mel, Melvin Hayes, who is playing the younger version of Victor here. Even though Hayes really didn't look much like Peter Cushing, he actually had some of his mannerisms down due to Cushing, who took this role of Victor Frankenstein incredibly seriously. He spent a lot of time coaching Hayes as to how to walk and how to move. I believe Frankenstein is around 15 years old in this scene. We learn that as a result of his mother's death, he's been left as the sole heir to the Frankenstein estate. He then agrees to continue the monthly allowance to his not well-to-do aunt and his young cousin Elizabeth. From here, we meet scientist Paul Kremp, played by television star Robert Urquhart. At the film's premiere, actually, Robert Urquhart was so disgusted by the film that he stormed out of the theater. He absolutely hated it, and he hated it so much that he never made another horror film and never worked for Hammer Studios again. Kind of odd, I think. You didn't know you were making a movie about a mad scientist that dismembers corpses? Regardless, we established a teacher-student dynamic between he and Victor. We then fast forward, and Victor and Paul, which, actually, side note, what is it with Hammer and the name Paul? I believe the hero of, I don't know if it's this series or the Dracula series, I can't recall. Like the next three, the hero's name is Paul. Anyway, he and Victor have been performing experiments together. On one particular night, they were able to bring a puppy back from the dead. At this, Victor suggests that they might be able to create the perfect human being. After a few nights of grave robbing and scavenging human remains, Paul eventually refuses to help Victor anymore. This also coincides with the arrival of Victor's fiancée, Elizabeth, now all grown up. Fun side note here, the actress who played young Elizabeth is actually the daughter of Hazel Court, who plays adult Elizabeth. Elizabeth has come to live with Victor. Hooray! I'm sure that won't throw any sort of wrench into his plans at all. After assembling the body of his creature, well, I suppose it's his creation at this point. It's not exactly a creature yet. Victor needs a brain. This is such a chilling bit of dialogue here, and it serves as a perfect example of how well Peter Cushing played this role. When Paul asks him where the brain is going to come from, Victor very coldly looks directly at him, pauses, and then responds with, "I'll get it." Again, to my earlier point, this is what separates Cushing's Frankenstein from Colin Clive's. Cushing is outright murderous in his intent, as we'll see. So Victor seeks out noted genius Professor Bernstein and invites him over for idle chat and discussion. As he and the professor are heading upstairs, Victor pauses at a painting, which may be a bit of foreshadowing, before pushing the professor through, not over, through the banister. Bernstein crashes to the ground below, dead. So there's a few things to unpack here. The painting, this is actually a Rembrandt painting, and it's called The Anatomy Lesson of Dr. Nicholas Tulp. The painting itself depicts a hanged criminal being dissected by Dr. Tulp. The production team deliberately chose this painting. The stairway effect. Turns out the stunt double in this gag was injured on set. I'm sure we can all see the subtle lighting change when the stunt actor hits the padded area of the floor, right? Unfortunately for them, everything hit the padded area except their head. Ouch. Speaking of their head, if you need a brain, why would you throw them down head first? Wouldn't that damage the brain? I digress. From here, the professor is buried. Victor proceeds to the burial vault and removes his brain. Paul, however, attempts to stop him, and in the scuffle that follows, the brain is damaged. While all of these happenings transpire, Paul has also been trying to convince Elizabeth to leave the house, and we also establish that Victor has a side thing going on with Justine the maid, who he promises to marry, but also doesn't promise to marry. Victor assembles his creature and brings it to life. But, unfortunately, as stated, the brain is damaged, and it leaves the creature in kind of a violent psychosis. So, let's talk about Sir Christopher Lee and the creature design. The creature design here was quite literally a last-minute design. Makeup artist Philip Leakey had tried multiple times to design the creature makeup using a cast of Lee's head, but failed at every turn. The final design was created the night before shooting began, and was achieved by using mostly cotton and everyday household items. This meant that the design had to be recreated every day, since Leakey didn't use any latex appliances or molds. Sir Christopher Lee also had input on the design of the makeup, and has stated that the first makeup test looked like a cross between a wolf and a pig, while the second test had him looking like the Elephant Man. It wasn't until someone suggested that he look more patched together that they settled on the design that we see in the film. On the topic of Lee, he and actor Bernard Bresslaw were both in the running for the role of the creature, and it's rumored that Lee was chosen strictly due to budgetary reasons. Breslaw's daily salary was £10 per day, whereas Lee's was only £8, and for a measly £2, Sir Christopher Lee became an international superstar. Back to the film. Without the professor's intellect, the creature is just a mindless child, and Victor locks it up. Unfortunately, it escapes. It roams the countryside and scares a blind man by not answering him. Proceeds to kill the blind man before Victor and Paul find it. Paul shoots it in the eye, and the creature yells in pain. Turns out this was a real yell from Lee, who accidentally got fake blood in his eye. Paul and Victor bury the creature in the woods, and Paul leaves town. Naturally, as soon as Paul leaves town, Victor digs up the creature. Back at the estate, Justine, the maid that Victor has been messing around with, tells him that she's pregnant with his child. She tells him that she knows what he's been doing, and she'll go to the authorities if he refuses to marry her. And listen, I know it's probably a social structure thing here, but if I'm Victor, and I have this chick who I've obviously had a side thing with, so I'm attracted to her, and she knows that I'm a maniac, and seems to be okay with it so long as I marry her, shit, why not go for it? It's less work. You don't have to hide all the shit you're doing, right? Just saying. Anyway, Victor has none of that and locks her in a room with a creature, dead. Elizabeth invites Paul back to the house the night before she and Victor are to be married. He and Victor reconnect, and Victor shows Paul the creature. Sheer hubris at this point, I suppose. Paul now also threatens to go to the authorities. In all of this, the creature escapes onto the roof and eventually threatens Elizabeth. Victor, who was chasing the creature with a gun, opens fire and accidentally shoots Elizabeth. Victor then throws an oil lamp at the creature, causing it to catch fire, fall through the roof light, and into the lab, destroying all evidence of any of this actually happening. Very convenient. Why is it convenient? Because we cut back to the cell, and the priest doesn't believe a single word that Victor has told him. Paul visits him, and Victor begs him to testify that it was the creature that killed Justine, not him. Paul denies all knowledge of the experiments and the existence of the creature, thus making Victor look like the psychotic, murderous madman that he actually is, just in a different way. Paul then joins Elizabeth, somehow not dead, and tells her there's nothing that they can do for Victor, and Victor is led away to the guillotine. And that is the Curse of Frankenstein, folks. Really, really awesome monster flick here. So, let's get into it. For me, the good. Peter Cushing is an awesome Victor. Everything he does is in greater service to the character. Even something as tiny as wiping blood on the lapel of his jacket. His Frankenstein is methodical, calculating, and cold, in an almost subdued-like fashion. Cushing would go on to play Frankenstein 7 more times, and while it was always a treat to see, I feel like none of them are as good as his time in the role in this film. Sir Christopher Lee's creature. Lee's creature was different than Karloff's, and it needed to be. I feel that if Sir Christopher tried to copy anything that Karloff had done in the prior films, that it would have failed. His version of the creature is more a lost, confused, mindless being than an unknowing child. I do, however, wish we got to see more of Lee in this role in the Hammer Frankenstein sequels. Lee and Cushing together. This would be the first time that these Hammer legends would appear together, and it would not be the last. This film made this team bankable horror stars, as they would both go on to appear in Hammer's Dracula and Mummy films. They would also, again, be directed by Terence Fisher. Another great spot in this film for me is Fisher's direction. Much like Cushing's performance, Fisher's direction is in greater service to the film and not just the particular scene. He approaches things in such a way that you oftentimes feel like you're watching this take place in real time. His camera placement and his shot composition is deliberate. He lets scenes breathe and lets things happen within the scene without forcibly drawing your attention to it. In fact, the only time that the camera has any sort of purposeful, jerky, or erratic motion is at the reveal of the creature, which I believe actually adds to the terror of the reveal. The bad? I don't know, man. I don't want to say there's not any bad in this film, but there's almost not enough that really stands out to even mention it. Some of the minor subplots could be daunting, but the pacing of the film keeps them from ever becoming sluggish. Paul's here then not here stick could be a bit annoying, but again, Fisher does such a great job with the pacing, and the actors do such a great job with what they have, that it's not. Some may say that there isn't enough creature in the movie, but the movie isn't about the creature, it's about Victor. Anyone that knows me know that I consider James Whale's Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein two of my top 10 favorite films of all time. I also used to read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein once a year, so to say that I'm a Frankenstein fan is a bit of an understatement. So with all that considered, what do I rate The Curse of Frankenstein? I think I would land it at a solid 8 out of 10. While I don't like it as much as I do the Universal classic movies that I mentioned, it's definitely up there and is probably my third favorite Frankenstein adaptation to be committed to film. So, there you have it. Monstercast is back. Again, apologies for the longer than intended absence. In closing, I'd ask that you follow me on social media, at MMMonstercast on Twitter, at ManMadeMonstercast on Instagram and Facebook, at R0B138 on Patreon, at R0B_138 on Twitter, at R0B138 on Instagram, and R0B138 on YouTube. Again, guys, good to be back. I'm looking forward to doing some awesome monster content, some awesome horror content here as we approach the Halloween season. The No Life Till Letterbox podcast, I think, is on the back burner right now, just until I jump back and get my footing for the Monstercast. I don't want to put too much on my plate and underdeliver. Thanks for hanging out. This was awesome. Check this film out. It's incredible. And I will catch you on the flip side.